welcome you to another episode of The Charm of It, a podcast for knitters who share my fascination with the nitty-gritty details of our craft. If you're a returning viewer, it is so wonderful to see you again. Dissel's here with me, and I can see moth headed over out of the corner of my eye. If you're a new viewer, I'm so glad that you found your way to my little corner of the internet. You should know that I record 2 different kinds of episodes, and today is going to be a regular episode, so I will be talking about finished objects. I will be doing a yarn review, a Schroedinger Sweater segment, which is when I show you some yarn I have in stash and get your opinion about what I should do with it. And I think that's about it. Oh yes, and then I'm going to talk about some things that I would like to do with my knitting in 2018, and perhaps just some thoughts about what knitting brings to my life and a lot of curiosity about what knitting brings to your life. So, yeah, Moth is here now. She's my cat for new viewers. And I hope that you enjoy the episode. I can't wait to get started. Sorry I'm a few days late. It's difficult already in winter because there's only so many hours when there's enough natural light to record. And then just trying to figure out a new balance during like a time of life changes is, hit or miss, so thanks for bearing with me. And there is a chance that I'm going to have to stop recording because I'm waiting for maintenance to come take a look at my toilet tank because that has been making strange noises for the past few days. But hopefully I will get this episode recorded and then maintenance will come later. Okay, so with all those caveats, I have a lot of finished objects because I had such a long break between episodes. But I don't really want to talk about that many finished objects today, so I decided to only talk about the ones that I still have with me. So one I just finished up this weekend, and the other 2 are older, so I'll start with the older ones. First up, I knit myself a washcloth. I have never done that before. And I used Knit Picks Lindy chain, which is 70% linen, 30% cotton. This was beating up a blanket on the couch if you hear any, snorty terrier noises. Anyway, in the colorway Ash, which is this really lovely charcoal gray. And I have been curious about this yarn because one of my favorite yarns to knit warmer weather cardigans out of is Quince & Company Sparrow, which is 100% organic linen. And I love it, but it's on the pricier side. So I was curious about Lindy chain because it's cheaper and it comes in a few colors that Sparrow doesn't offer, mainly navy blue. I don't understand why Quince & Company doesn't offer more navy blues. It seems like it's a classic, common, popular neutral. Anyway, so when I was placing a Knit Picks order, I went ahead and added a skein so that I could try it out. And I thought that a washcloth or dishcloth would be the perfect testing ground because then I could really see how it holds up and what it does when it's machine washed and dried, which is important to me in warmer weather clothes because I sweat more when it's hot out. And so that was the thought process there. I mentioned on my last episode that I'm going to be knitting a vivid blanket, and I've had that pattern in my favorites for a really long time. However, the squares are knit from the center out, and I wasn't sure if that would annoy me too much to keep doing because that means you have to start with very few stitches on DPNs, in my case, because I prefer DPNs to other small circumference knitting methods. And then eventually you're going to have to switch to a 16-inch circular, and I just wasn't really sure how I would feel about that. So I found a free pattern it's actually a blanket that you knit from the center out, but I just stopped at a certain amount of rows, and then I added a garter stitch border. Pretty sure I added that. It's been a while. And so this was also a test of whether I enjoyed this style of knitting. And I will admit I found it a little bit fiddly, but the end result I love. I love the way that it's really drapey, even though it's a square. And this has been blocked. And you can see that while I was knitting it, it was stiff, which is kind of what linen yarn is like. But once it was blocked, it has a gorgeous drape on it. So I definitely would consider this yarn for sweaters, and I'm excited that I'm pretty sure it only took about 1/5 of the 50-gram skein, so maybe 10 grams to knit this, so I can go ahead and get a few more washcloths. I think they would make really lovely gifts for people, although personally I'm excited to use them to wash my dishes because I never understood why people would make dishcloths. It seemed a really weird thing to me. And then a couple years ago, one of my friends who crochets gave me a few crochet dishcloths, and I discovered that they are amazing and so much better at cleaning dishes. So I'm sure that I'll be knitting a few of these, especially since the Harry Potter House Cup kind of encourages you to make small items. And I think especially if you like packaged it with some handmade soap or something, it would be a really lovely gift for people who you don't know what to gift them, but you want to show them that you appreciate them and you don't want to add a bunch of clutter to their house. So yeah, as I said, I used a free pattern, and I really love how it looks. And it knit up pretty quickly. I think that is all I have to say about that. Next up are Bertie Bott's Every Flavor socks. Hang on one moment. Sorry, I have an itch in my throat. So if you watched the last episode, which was all about my works in progress, you saw that I was working on these. They are a gift for my biologist friend who I knit the really bright orange socks for before. So I am not used to knitting socks for men, and so when I had ordered that bright orange, I ordered 3 skeins instead of 2, so 150 grams, just in case, because I did not want to run out of yarn. And it turned out that his first pair of socks only took, I think, 80 grams, so I had enough left over just from the 2 skeins to go ahead and do contrast cuff, toe, or heel and toe for this sock. And I really love the way the variegated yarn looks when you do the solid toe, like when you do all the solids for contrast. I think it makes it look better. So I will hold these a little closer so hopefully you can see all those colors and how nicely they striped up. And the orange is Knit Pick Stroll Brights in Hot Tamale, and it really is that fluorescent. And the variegated is Knit Pick Stroll Tonal in Gumball. And it was just a pleasant surprise that it basically knit up as micro stripes. I didn't use a pattern. I did a 1x1 cuff, ribbed cuff, and then I transitioned to 3x1 for the body of the sock, which is what I did for my dad's socks back in the summer, and I really liked how it looked, and it seemed to fit really well. It provides a lot of give. I used 68 stitches because my friend wears a size 10.5 men's, pretty sure, something like that. Oh, I have to start a new segment. There's a close-up of the socks, and here is a close-up of the toe that I will be talking about soon. So, sorry, maybe I should have had more caffeine today. So I went ahead and followed the sizing chart from Splendid Book of Socks, something like that. No, it's. I'll put it on the project page in case you're interested, but it's just a really useful chart, and it looks at shoe sizes, and then it tells you how long the leg should be and how long the foot should be and all that. So it is my go-to for knitting gift socks when I can't make the person try it on as I knit. I did a fish lips kiss heel, and that was just so that I could maintain that micro striping throughout. My favorite heel for both knitting and how it fits is a regular heel flapping gusset, but when you want to make sure that variegated yarn behaves itself, then I think that the fish lips kiss heel is the way to go. I mentioned last time that I always increase 2 stitches before beginning that heel, and then I tend to do work until there's till there's 2 fewer stitches in the middle than the pattern suggests, and that makes a deeper heel that I find fits better for people with high arches, which tends to be almost everyone in my life. I think my dad's the only one who doesn't have high arches. And then for the toes, I went ahead and I used the My Favorite Toe from a Knitty article by Kate Atherley, who has since released the book Custom Socks. And in the book, she calls it her barnhouse toe. Anyway, she has more tapered toes than I do, and so does my friend who I was knitting these for. So it's I think it provides a really nice curve, and as I said, it's free on nitty. So basically what you do is you do a decrease round, then 3 straight, a decrease round, 2 straight, decrease 2 straight, and then every other decrease 3 times, and then decrease every round. It took me a few times of using this toe to be able to remember it, but now I just think of it as 1, 2, 3 for the pattern, for the repeat. So you do every 4th round once, every 3rd round twice, and every 2nd round 3 times. So that's how I remember it. Now I was knitting the second one when I was at a friend's watching Pacific Rim, and I had brought a little ball of orange that was left over. When I finished knitting the first pair of socks, I had, 2 small balls of orange left. And so that's what I've been using for contrast, and I just throw one in my bag. And I ran out of yarn here. And I had another small ball of orange at home, so I could have just waited and finished it later. But I figured since I would have to weave in an extra end anyway, I thought it would be really fun to add just a touch of the variegated yarn to the toe and have them be a little bit mismatched. It seemed like something that my friend would enjoy, and I don't know, it seemed quirky. And the friend who I was hanging out with, I asked what she thought, and she liked the idea too. So that's what I did. And funnily enough, this is my first finished object for January. Well, no, I also finished a pair of mitts for my niece, but that was right around the 1st. So it's been quite a while since I had a finished object, and it felt really good to finish these. They ended up taking just under 400 yards of yarn, and I cannot wait to give them to him. I think he'll really like them. He wears the first pair of socks that I knit him all the time, so definitely needs a few more. And I like it when socks are about the same length in the foot and the legs, so that's what I did. One more finished object. These are my Decadent Bloomers. Yes, I knit myself a pair of granny panties. I love them. So this, I used the Mamaluca pattern, which is a free pattern, and there was like a campaign going on. It's by a Swedish designer, and she had released it for free, and then Drops, which is a big yarn company, basically released a knockoff of it. I think also for free, but the point is that they knocked off her pattern and everything. And I believe Mamaluca are a traditional item of clothing to wear in Sweden. They are certainly not something that I had thought that I would be wearing before, but this summer, a very kind viewer, one moment, Thistle wants to jump up. Come on, Thistle. Here we go. A very kind viewer sent me a link to an interesting article about how people with arthritis who wore woolen underclothes basically had lower pain levels. And one of my major points of pain for my arthritis is my hips. So after that, I decided that I was going to have to knit myself a pair of woolen undergarments. And I love how they turned out. So first I was going to use a vintage pattern, but when I was looking at it, the sizing didn't make sense, and it would have had a seam running right here, and that did not seem the most comfortable. So instead, I used the Mamaluca pattern to here, and then I used the lace edging from the vintage pattern until I ran out. So I think I got 1.5 repeats of the chart until I ran out of yarn. And I used one skein, 100 grams of Black Trillium Fiber Arts in the Lilt sock base, which is a merino silk blend, and it's custom spun for their dyeing, and it is incredible. I received the skein as a gift, and it's in the copper roof color, which I think is absolutely beautiful to begin with, but I had also received a pair of socks knit out of that same yarn maybe 2 years ago? A while ago, because a podcast viewer, I was knitting a pair of socks, and I wasn't a huge fan of how it was working up, and so a podcast viewer said, hey, let's do a sock exchange, and she sent me the most beautiful, beautiful socks. And I wear them a lot because they make me really happy, and that yarn has held up so well. So when I was trying to think of what yarn I was going to use to make my bloomers, I knew it needed to be something soft, right, because I mean, obviously your thighs are going to be one of the more sensitive areas of your body. And even though I mainly plan to wear them in the winter, but I have quite a few pairs of high-waisted, wide-legged trousers that I'm sure I can fit these under. So I'm not necessarily going to be only wearing them over tights. So I wanted to make sure it wasn't going to itch me, but I also wanted to make sure it would be pretty durable because, there's going to be friction involved and that kind of stuff. It seemed like a shame to use such a beautiful color on undergarments, but I tried really hard to make sure that I'm not hoarding yarn and saving it for best. So that's because you can always buy more, right? And I'm so glad that I used them for this project because they're wonderful to wear and it's just beautiful. And the yarn it's got that glow that you would find in a real copper roof. I don't know how they did that. I'm not sure how well it's showing up on screen. And so once I finished the knitting and added the little frilly bits, I decided it needed a little bit of embroidery. And I'm very much a beginner embroiderer, so I looked on a website and it showed me a couple stitches. So I added just a little bit of vine and leaf, and that's in Quince & Company Turn in the Oyster colorway. So that does make them no longer machine dryable, but that's okay because I wasn't really planning to put them in the dryer anyway. And I wash my Quince & Company Turn stuff in the washer, even though it's not super washable, so I have no problems putting these in the washer. Here's a close-up of my very wonky leaves. You can tell that I got better as I went, so that's the last one that I did. I think it looks the most leaf-like. And that really pretty vintage lace pattern. And there's ribbing on the side to help with the fit. The pattern is written in one size, the designer's size, but she does give tips on how to modify it, and since this pattern has been written so much, knit so much, I found a few helpful project notes that help me size down because I'm smaller than the designer. And I also knit this along with Tommy from Dynamite Trujillo and Casey from, oh no, Casey, what's your podcast name? Casey Maura, but I can't remember the name of her podcast. But it's like Casey Maura XO is, I think, her Instagram and YouTube channel, if not the name of her podcast. Maybe Creative Musings. Anyway, so that was really fun to have company while knitting it. And Tommy talked a lot about the modifications that she made because she is on the petite side as well. And she made more modifications than I did. And in retrospect, there are a few things I would do differently, even though these fit quite well. So the first thing I did was the pattern calls for double this length on the waistband, and then you're able to fold it over. I just didn't think that was necessary for me. I want to be able to wear this under skirts and trousers and have a slim profile. So I didn't really want it to be twice as bulky. And I only had one skein, so I wanted to make sure that I didn't run out of yarn. And then even by cutting this length in half, they still come up to my belly button. And I am not a tall person, however, I am very long in the rise. For example, high-waisted jeans are starting to come back in style. I have a pair of jeans that have a 10-inch rise, which is 25 centimeters, and they hit right below my belly button. So I have a lot of length in there. If you have a short rise, then you would want to keep that in mind accordingly. So that was, and then I cast on, I can't remember the number that I cast on as far as the waist goes, but it is on my project page just in case you have a similar waist to me. The nice thing is 2x2 ribbing has a lot of give to it, so I try to err on the side of smaller when I'm doing that kind of ribbing. And it was really funny because while I was knitting this part, it kind of just seemed like it was a big hat, and you knit it on a 16-inch circular. So I found this really, see, it's like a hat. Apparently I'm just going to put things on my head in every episode. Anyway, I am scattered, but what I was trying to say was these were really, really fun to knit. I wasn't really sure where the pattern was going for quite a while, but most of it just feels like you're knitting a hat in the round on 16-inch circular needles, and what could be more relaxing, right? I love knitting hats. If for some reason you don't like knitting hats, then I guess it wouldn't be for you. But, so, the next thing I did was when I split for the front and the back, not really split, but you know, you have the ribbing running down the side, I adjusted all of those numbers as well. I was also knitting at a slightly tighter gauge than the designer, and so I was both adjusting for having a smaller size, which would require fewer stitches, but also a tighter gauge, which would require more stitches. So I just found the decimal that I needed for that, and then I was just multiplying all of her numbers by my decimal so that proportionally they were the same. And because of the way the math worked out, there were, I think, 2 or 4 more stitches in the back than the front. Next time I would divide it so that there were more stitches covering the back, because my bum is bigger than my front. And so, I mean, knitting is stretchy, so the entire circumference, that's fine. But when I wear these, even though they fit well, the front comes up a little higher than the back. So the front part of the waistband comes up just a little bit more, kind of like, you know, when you're wearing a sweater and you want the back to come up higher and the front to sit lower. That's like the reverse for these. And so I think that if I had had more stitches in the back, then that would have helped keep that waistband even when I'm wearing it. But it wasn't that big a deal. And so then eventually you do some short rows, and that's the other thing that I would change. So I would do a few extra stitches in the back than the front, and I would start this short rows sooner, because, so, you know, the way you're shaped, like this is your front, maybe you've got a little bit of a belly. The way I'm shaped, I'll stop making this second person. But mainly you're like this, and then because your bum is curved, because my bum is curved, that's a longer length. So that's why you need some short rows in the back to add more length there so that it fits better. And I just would add a few more short rows because, as I said, for me right now, the top of the back gets pulled down a little bit compared to the top of the front. I love these, and I find them very comfortable to wear. These are like nitpicky things, but because you can completely customize your knitting, why wouldn't you be nitpicky, right? That's pretty much my attitude. So you do the short rows, and then it's really cleverly done. You end up putting the leg stitches on hold and working this middle piece, trying to avoid using a certain word, around, and then you graft that, and then you just go ahead and work the leg stitches, picking up some here. So it's really enjoyable. There are very few seams. There's only the grafting that you have to do here, and then just picking up a few stitches right along there, but not too much at all. And it was really easy for me to add the vintage lace pattern on because, luckily, some kind Ravelry user who had made that vintage knickers pattern graphed the lace. Because the vintage pattern is only written out, and it was, I find it so much easier to work lace when it's graphed. So I used her graph. I did have to tweak it a little bit because the pattern, that vintage pattern, so the graph that she did is designed for knitting flat, and you have some stockinette in the middle, whereas I wanted it to be a smooth all around. And I remember that I had a few issues with what stitch count I needed for the first couple rounds, but once I sorted that out, so I did have to rip back a little bit, but not too badly, and once I sorted that out, it was very smooth sailing. So all I did was, once I had finished grafting and was ready to start the legs, I weighed my yarn, and then I knit this lace edging until half my yarn was gone. Well, until a little less than half my yarn was gone so that I would have enough to bind off. And I used up pretty much every inch of this skein, which made me feel so good. And then, as I said, I added a little touch of embroidery, and these make me really happy. I am going to go ahead and include a modeled photograph over tights because, I mean, why not? You know, it feels a little strange, but every time I show you a modeled photo of a cardigan, I'm like inviting you to look at my torso, so it is what it is. The one other thing I wanted to say was that with the short rows, I did the shadow wrap short rows, which are also what you find in the Fish Lips Kiss Heel. And I find them very enjoyable to work, but I didn't like how they looked here. Okay, so I did them in the ribbing, and you can really see that line of short rows. So I will be experimenting with more short row methods in the future to find one that is a little bit more hidden. I know it sounds like I'm nitpicking these to death, but honestly, I love them. I love wearing them. They make me feel warm and snug and also pretty. I don't know. They're really fun for me, and I would definitely knit another pair. Probably also with embellishment. Next up is my Schroedinger Sweater segment, and it is an actual sweater this time. So this yarn was recently sent to me by Stacy. And Stacy and I have become friends. She started watching my podcast, and then she got in touch with me, and I discovered that she has a podcast too, and I love watching her podcast as well. So we've become friends there and on Instagram. And she is also a hand dyer. But I think it was in November, she posted that she's been working on a scrappy blanket, but she was almost out of yarn. And I have all these scraps and absolutely no intentions of ever knitting a scrappy blanket. So I offered to just go ahead and send her a bunch of scraps. And I think it was like 300 grams or something. I was really impressed with how many scraps I could come up with. I guess I've been knitting for quite a while now. So they were all just living inside my fishbowl, and it's nice to think that they'll actually have a good purpose. But so I sent that off to her, and then she sent me the nicest package in return. And one of the things in that package, and it was completely out of the blue, I did not expect it, was 200 grams or 900 yards of her hand-dyed yarn in the Antique Rose colorway, which I think is really beautiful. And this is her label, Twisted Threads. And you guys know that I don't advertise or talk a lot about acquisitions, but the reason why I wanted to mention this is because it's 100% US organic merino. It's fingering weight. It feels amazing, and it's got that lovely two-ply texture. And I wanted to mention this because I know that there are quite a few knitters who enjoy buying hand-dyed yarn but are looking for ethically sourced spaces. And Stacy has been looking into all kinds of U.S. spaces that are ethically made and environmentally friendly, and she's been transitioning her shop over to using them. So I thought that I would mention that in case you're looking, because it can be difficult to just, I don't know, search Etsy for them. Plus, I really like Stacy. She's a friend, and I think it's okay to brag about your friends. Hopefully you agree. But this is not a buy this yarn segment. This is a tell me what to do with this yarn that I have segment. So, as I said, I have 900 yards, which is a little less than a fingering weight sweater usually takes for me. I usually use 1,100 yards on a long sleeve fingering weight cardigan. However, so I could either make a 3/4 sleeve cardigan. I just think it's so pretty. To me, it says spring, so that's why I want to talk about this now. But I also, one of the things that I want to do this year is kind of explore how I can get pullovers, hand knit pullovers to work for me, because I quite like how I look in pullovers. I like that kind of sweater girl aesthetic. I think it flatters my shape and it works with the poofy skirts that I tend to wear. However, since I overheat easily, in the past, I had knit a sport weight jumper and then a fingering weight jumper pullover, and I ended up frogging them and reknitting them into cardigans because I just wasn't reaching for them as much, because I would end up feeling overheated, and because I have limited neck and shoulder arm mobility, it's really difficult for me to reach above my head, and that's what you have to do to take sweaters on and off. So cardigans are just much easier to take on and off all day. So that, all of that is a preface for me saying I really want to figure out how to work hand knit jumpers back into my wardrobe this year. And one way that I want to try that is to maybe knit an elbow length one. I've noticed that when you watch kind of period films, women are, especially British ones, women are frequently wearing woolen elbow length jumpers. And I'm quite curious about that, because in my mind it seems really weird, because if you're wearing wool, wouldn't your forearms get cold? But maybe, especially since I tend to push my sleeves up anyway, it would be kind of the perfect balance for me. So I think that this yarn would be excellent for that because, as I said, to me this is a very springtime color, although I wear pink year round. And springtime, of course, is when everything starts warming up, although springs are nice and late here, which I love. And so it just seems like that would be the time when I would want to just be able to pull on a cute little, I guess, knit t-shirt, basically, and head out with a skirt and maybe some boots or whatever. And since this is merino, I know that it's going to be soft enough to wear bare skin. I don't have to worry about layering it over anything. So I want to knit some kind of elbow length jumper sweater. Since it is merino, I want to knit it at a fairly firm gauge. I would say I'm going to knit it at least 8 stitches to the inch, probably around there, just to help prevent it from pilling. Do you have any pattern ideas for me? Because I love Ravelry, but I find it a little bit difficult to always, the reason why I design most of my sweaters myself is because I can't find ones that I really like on Ravelry. I could knit a Belmont out of this because that calls for 900 yards of fingering weight yarn, but that's a cardigan, and I just really want to knit some kind of short sleeve jumper. And I want it to be vintage inspired, so I want it to be cropped and fitted at the waist, and then have some kind of vintage feeling details. So if you have any patterns or ideas, or if you have any experience with short sleeve sweaters and you think, oh yeah, that's a great idea, or actually that didn't work so well for me, please let me know. That's why I'm sharing now, so that this can all percolate in the back of my mind and it'll be ready when I get to cast on, which probably won't be until April, although we'll see. Depends on what I end up doing in February. So that's where I'm at with that, and I'm perfectly happy designing it myself. If you just have like certain, I don't know, maybe there are Pinterest boards or inspiration images, I would love to see any of those ideas as well. I definitely am inclined towards adding a little collar because I love Peter Pan collars. But yeah, so I would love to hear your thoughts on what I should knit with this. And I also picked up during a Black Friday sale in November some organic fingering weight cotton that I'm also going to try making a similar short-sleeved sweater with. So, but I'm jumping ahead to my 2018 plans, so I might as well transition right into those, since that's that segment. Isn't it so pretty? Squishy. I'm not a big resolution maker in January. As I mentioned at the end of my last episode, I really enjoy picking a word for the year because I love words. And this year I'm picking cultivate. So there is that, but specific resolutions are not usually my thing. Instead, I like to do a resolution on my birthday. I just like to have, I guess, new starts all year round. But there are some things that I'm interested in doing knitting-wise this year versus previous years, a little bit of focus shifts and that kind of thing, so I'll talk to you about that. The first one is getting back into knitting pullovers or jumpers as well and not just cardigans. I find cardigans very easy to fit into my wardrobe, so of course I'm still going to be knitting them, but I miss knitting jumpers. I think they're really fun to knit, and of course they require less finishing, which is nice, and you know, they're cheaper because you don't have to buy buttons. But also, I like the aesthetics of pullovers. So in addition to experimenting with some short sleeve pullovers, in case you're a new viewer, I knit myself a lace weight jumper at 11 stitches to the inch. And I did this as a very long-term project. I worked on the pieces on and off for like 6 months. But I love wearing that sweater. I wear it so much. And I can comfortably wear it all day, and I knit it out of Knit Picks Shadow, which is their merino lace yarn. So I actually have another sweater's quantity of Knit Picks Shadow in my stash now. I got a gift card to Knit Picks, and that's what I used it for, partly. And it's actually going to be a colorwork jumper. I'm really excited about this. It's inspired by oceans and beaches and some of the knitwear that's in the movie The Secret of Ronan-ish, which is a wonderful movie if you haven't seen it, and very family friendly. So I recommend you look into it. But the point is that I've got that planned. I have a beautiful sweaters quantity of like this silk merino blend yarn that a viewer generously sent me after she realized she didn't like working with lace weight, and I think I'm going to try an A-line pullover out of that because that silk is going to be so drapey, and I have another silk merino blend in my stash that I think would go really pretty with it. So I've got plans for that as kind of a scallop stripe top. I know you've mainly seen me wearing fitted things, but I do also wear A-line shapes. I like how they look with, especially if I'm wearing like skinny jeans, with that kind of look. It's just I haven't knit anything like that because I always found it much easier to thrift clothes that were oversized than clothes that were fitted. So that's why I've been knitting fitted things. But so I want to experiment with that, and of course A-line shapes are very popular in knitwear right now. Like it seems like a lot of the popular Ravelry patterns use that shape, so I'm curious about how that's going to go. But I just need to, clear the decks a bit and find the space. Because my first lace weight jumper took me 6 months, even though I know that that's because I kept putting it down and picking it up, and even though I know that's because I picked complicated stitch patterns for it, and so I'm not going to be doing that, like with the blue scalloped one, that'll be much quicker to knit. And then with the color work one, obviously color work is a bit complicated, but I want to do a traditional kind of Fair Isle color work, so those tend to be really easy to memorize patterns, and color work moves quite quickly for me. So it'll just be that whole 11 stitches to the inch thing that is going to slow me down. But for some reason, not for some reason, because I've joined the Harry Potter House Cup, it has made me a bit more hesitant to cast on for that kind of big ongoing project. But I really want to try that as well. So, wow, I got off track. But as I was saying, I want to figure out how to make more jumpers, and I think either using lace weight yarn, since I've already shown that that works really well for me, or trying out short-sleeved fingering weight jumpers. And then I also want to knit more with plant-based fibers, just because that will extend my hand knit wardrobe more. I wear my linen cardigans so much. And I received another sweaters quantity of Prince & Company Sparrow for Christmas, so I'll be able to knit myself my usual summer one, but I also want to knit at least one more out of organic cotton, because I'm so much happier when I can wear hand knits in my wardrobe, and I really do live in a 4-season climate. So we have 3 months of hot temperatures. In my world, hot is anything above 70 degrees. Which is 20-ish Celsius. So we have a solid 3 months of that for summer, and then late spring and early autumn also tend to be warm. So I just want to make sure that I'm not getting cranky with the weather because it's stopping me from wearing hand knits, if that makes sense. The other thing that I'd like to do more of this year is color work. Every time I do color work projects, I just fall in love with them all over again. And I wonder why I'm spending time doing other knitting. And I definitely, at this point, have several color work projects waiting in my stash for me to knit on them. So I want to make sure that I'm doing that. And I've got some color work patterns that have been in my queue for ages, so they really need to go ahead and get knit. So those are my only 2 concrete things. The other thing that is interesting for me, and this is what I wanted to talk about with you, is that I feel like the role that knitting is playing in my life is currently undergoing a shift, and that's because my life is currently undergoing a shift, which I like. I grew up moving, so every 3 years or so I start to feel like things need to change, and I've been living here for 3 years now, and I don't want to move, but it's really nice to suddenly have new changes. In the way of, as I mentioned on the last episode, I now have a boyfriend, so being with him more, and then he's got this good group of friends, and they like to play games, so I am playing, strategy board games? I don't really know. Anyway, that kind of thing, and like a little bit of, are they called tabletop games? Role-playing ones. We just started those last weekend. So I'm doing more socializing, but I still want to be knitting, and so I think that I'm going to be doing more stockinette projects than I used to. That was the point of this. So basically, and also just more of my mental space and energy is being taken up with socializing than it used to be. So when I want to knit, sometimes more, I've always liked to have at least one simple project going so that I could always have something relaxing if that's what I needed my knitting to be. But these days, more often than not, I am reaching more and more for my simpler projects and just letting myself relax into the knitting and finding it very soothing and meditative, as opposed to having to do very complex, detail, thinking required knitting, if that makes sense. So I feel like in the past, I have been really interested in seeking out complex knitting and designing things myself, and I'm not going to stop doing that. However, I'm consciously making the decision that when I'm planning my knitting, whether I'm designing it myself or not, I'm planning to make sure that most of my projects are on the simpler end of the spectrum right now, or at least have simpler bits to them. Like instead of doing all over lace, I'm just doing lace fronts for the cardigan that I'm currently knitting. And yeah, hopefully that doesn't bother you. I know a lot of you watch my podcast because of the complicated and detailed knitting and my kind of technical viewpoint, and I promise that that's not going to change. I mean, the other sweater that I'm planning to knit is going to be all like twisted stitches and self-designed. But it's just interesting the way that knitting can be whatever you want it to be and whatever you need it to be at your current life stage. And I think that especially for the first half of the year, as my life is undergoing all these transitions, it's really nice to know that I can pick very simple, relaxing knitting that I can still work on and just enjoy, really. And I'm also starting to, now that I've been knitting some simpler things, like, the bloomers that I knit were mainly stockinette. It really is lovely to wear stockinette projects. They wear really nicely, and it's not that I don't love the more complex ones, but even this that I knit last year, it's got a lot of stockinette to it as well as the cables, and I think that just makes for really lovely garments. And it kind of lets the more complicated things shine more, if that makes sense. So that's just where I feel I'm at with my knitting, and I would love to hear what type of knitting you're drawn to and what that brings to your life, because I'm just interested in you. And yeah, so those are my thoughts on changes and focuses that I have for the upcoming year. So it should be fun. For me, I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm so sneezy today. For me, colorwork knitting is almost as relaxing as stockinette knitting, because it's basically stockinette just with two colors and you look at a graph. So that's part of why I expect I'll be doing more colorwork knitting. Sometimes the more complex knitting, it hurts my neck and shoulders more. It takes more spoons for me to do it. In case you don't know, spoons are a way of referring to the energy and pain levels that pain tolerance that people with chronic illnesses have, and so the idea is just that some things are going to exhaust you more quickly than others. So, and it's not that it's not worth it, it's just something that I've noticed recently. Finally, today we're going to round out the episode by doing a yarn review. I thought I would talk about Knit Picks Hawthorne, which is a sock yarn. And I have used it in the fawn colorway, which is this lovely brown, to knit these socks. I cannot remember the name of the pattern. I think Artichoke? I will include a link to the sock project page, though, down below, so if you're interested, because they're a really pretty lace pattern. I've never thought of myself as a lace knitter, but I really am. I knit a lot of lace garments, and I wear my lace garments a lot, so. Back when I was still a fairly new knitter, I was trying as many sock yarns as possible to figure out which ones I liked best. And so I ordered a skein of Knit Picks Hawthorne because it comes in tonal colorways, which are one of my favorite things for socks. I like how there's a little bit of variation, but there's not so much that you can't knit with a pattern, because I prefer knitting pattern socks to plain socks. I don't see that changing, even though I was just talking about stockinette. And I needed a pair of brown socks. I'm like, okay, I'll try Knit Picks Hawthorne. And it's a superwash Highland wool. And when it arrived, I was really disappointed. In the skein, it doesn't even feel like wool. It has that kind of plasticky, crunchy feel that some superwash yarn has. Not all, just some. And when I was knitting it up, it didn't feel good. It felt draggy, and I don't know, my hands did not enjoy working with it at all. And it was kind of stiff, and when I first tried the socks on before I blocked them, they also felt kind of stiff and rough, so I was just really disappointed. They're not itchy, they weren't itchy at all, but they just didn't feel good, if that makes sense. However, I really like how this yarn has worn. Nowadays, I wear these socks quite a bit because now that they've been washed and worn a bit, they started to get softer and feel better. And so I reach for them more. As I said, I didn't really like how they felt at first, so I didn't reach for them. But now I really do wear them quite frequently. They've worn quite well. There's the toe and the heel. You can see that the sole, the color has kind of worn away a little more. I find that that frequently happens with dyed socks. I mean, almost all my yarn is dyed, but I don't know. It's just something that I expect to happen, especially with tonal or variegated yarn. But other than that, these have worn really well. There's just a little bit of ribbing in this lace pattern, but as you can see, the fabric is nice and bouncy. It maintains its shape. And I think there's enough stitch definition that you can really see those pretty kind of lace mock cables. And it honestly surprised me when I realized that I was reaching for these socks so much because I had such a negative first impression with the yarn. So, do I recommend the yarn? I wouldn't use this for gift socks because I don't like how they feel until they've been washed and worn a few times. And obviously you can't just pre-wash a pair of gift socks 5 times before giving them to a recipient. I guess you could. If you knew someone who didn't mind kind of sturdy socks, the feel, honestly, to me, it's not as itchy as some of the European sock yarns like Regia or West Yorkshire Spinners. I've never gotten any itch from these, and both of those sock yarns itch my ankles. But it's got that same kind of feel to it, so if you don't mind that feel, then I'm sure you'll be fine with Hawthorne. It wasn't a feel that I liked at first, but the way it's worn really impresses me. And they've come out with some absolutely beautiful new colorways. So, of course, it's Highland wool from Peru, and I remember on one of my early episodes, I researched a bit about the Peru kind of industry, and they are one of the countries where workers tend to be paid more, and they tend to have more protections in place as far as like sick days and retirement and all that kind of stuff goes. I can't speak specifically for whatever manufacturing facility Knit Picks uses. The only specifics on their website is that they don't use child labor, which is a weirdly low bar to me. As far as specifics, they do say, oh, we visit once a year, but, unless something is specific, I'm not really interested. So, and the yarn has been superwashed, so that's never going to be as environmentally friendly as untreated yarn, just because it's another treatment, so it's more energy and water and then whatever kind of chemicals are used for the superwashing process. I'm not one of those people who's like all chemicals are bad, because everything's a chemical, but just I know that the traditional superwashing process is not the most environmentally friendly, but that people are coming out with alternatives to that. I'm really rambling. There are a lot of caveats apparently when I talk about ethics and that kind of thing. But as I said, this has worn really well. Because my skin can tolerate non-superwash yarn next to me, I have a personal policy of not buying superwash yarn for sweaters, just because that way I'm reducing my environmental impact. And as I said, I can wear regular, but I can wear regular wool next to my skin, so I'd rather just buy that. However, if I did buy superwash yarns for sweaters, I would definitely consider Hawthorne for a sweater, just because it has worn really well. The colors are beautiful, and once you wear it a few times, it becomes really nice. However, it takes a while to knit a sweater, and for me at least, the process of knitting with this was not the most fun. So basically, you would have to be a product knitter over a process knitter for me. Like, the product side of me would have to win out. But I do think it would make a nice sweater once you had worn it in a little bit. So that's my yarn review for the week. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them here on YouTube in the questions thread over in the Ravelry group, which you'll find the link to down below. And you can also find me on Instagram and Ravelry as The Charm of It. Before I let you go, I think I forgot to tell you that I'm wearing my raspberry trellis cardigan, which I knit out of Elspeth Lavoyd's silky wool last May using the Boudica cardigan pattern, but I heavily modified it. So there's that, and now all I have to do is pull up Moth and Thistle so that we can all say goodbye. Hey, Mothy. Come here. Okay, here's Thistle, and here's Moth, and we're all wishing you a wonderful week or two until I see you again. I have so much fun recording these. Thank you so much, I know, baby, for all of the comments that you left last time. The warm welcome back was incredible and overwhelming and just filled me with joy. So thank you for watching and commenting and everything else, and I can't wait to see you again. Bye! They want to see you too. You're such a pretty kitty.